Good evening, everyone. Good evening. My name is Jose Rincon. I am the Artistic Services Manager here at Opera America. And it's my pleasure to welcome you to the first Making Connections session of the 2011-2012 season. Tonight's discussion topic is one that's very near and dear to us here at Opera America, as I'm sure it is to you, the process of developing new work. Nico Muley had a last-minute conflict and unfortunately is not able to be with us tonight, but our good friend John Musto graciously agreed to sit on the panel, so thank you, John. Opera America's Making Connections and Salon series are the kind of programming that we look forward to holding in the National Opera Center. If those of you who are not familiar with the National Opera Center, it will be a 25,000 square foot multi-purpose facility located on the 7th and 8th floor of this building, 337th Avenue, that will have an audition recital hall, recording studio, rehearsal rooms, score and recording library, a business center, in addition to the Opera America administrative offices. And I'm delighted to announce that the grand opening of the Opera Center will be exactly 1 year from today, September 21st, 2012. So mark your calendars now for that momentous occasion. And you can stay up to date with the Opera Center's progress by going to our website, operaamerica.org/operacenter. Tonight's session is being videotaped and will soon be available to Opera America members on our website. If you're not an Opera America member but would like to be one, feel free to speak to me or my colleague Lindsay Working after the session, and we will gladly hook you up. On your seats, you have the program for tonight with speaker bios, and you also have our 2011-2012 season brochure with information on all our programs and resources for artists this season. Let's see what else. We have 3 exciting events coming up in the next 3 weeks. Next week, on September 28th, we have Effective Auditions, another Making Connections session. On October 5th, we have a Salon series featuring the music of composer David T. Little. And on October 12th, we have a Making Connections session on how to be a teaching artist. And you can find more information on those in the brochure and on our website. Tonight's discussion will go until about 8 p.m. Afterwards, I hope you will stay for a glass of wine and some continued conversation. So, without further delay, I will turn it over to John.
Thanks, Jose. Welcome, everyone. I think the other thing to say is that there's going to be some conversation on this end of the table for maybe half an hour, 45 minutes, if we keep careful to ourselves. And then, we will also open this up for questions from you. And actually, it would be helpful for me just to know kind of who's in the room. If you're composers or directors that are actually interested in developing new work, and that's why you're here to hear about this, or are you people just interested in the creative process? So without getting too cheesy, could you raise your hand if you're actually developing a new piece of music theater or an opera? Great. All right, I think that actually helps me a lot. So I think the way I wanted to start out was at the very beginning, good place to start, which is just to say, from each of you, how does a new piece of opera or a new piece of music theater actually start? And I'm wondering if you could maybe use a recent example of one that you've been developing. Also, just to say, Jim Schaefer, Beth Greenberg, John Musto. Jim Schaefer running the Center for Contemporary Opera. Beth Greenberg, a director who's been seminal in developing a lot of new work at all levels, and John Musto, a composer who's had great success creating new works for the stage. So maybe Jim, start with you.
The operas tend to come to us. We are one of the few companies that actually will produce new operas and take on composers' works. So when they first arrive, we're very interested in actually looking at the potential for them to go forward. That's the main criteria. The Andrew Mellon Foundation just gave us a very nice grant to expand our development series. And we put out a call for operas, and from that call we received over 73 entries, many of them and very, very good. There were some not so good, but most of them were very, very good that could go on. So the first step is just to look at the quality of the music, look at the quality of the libretto, and then from the general director's standpoint, look at the producibility of the opera.
And Beth?
Yeah, I think I have an even simpler answer, is that someone has a story to tell. And that story is something that has to be told. It's a story that's important for us today to hear about, because either it's a contemporary story or it's an ancient story that still has relevance to our own lives today. And from that point, the librettist, the book writer, will shop around and find a composer who feels the same way, and the collaboration begins. John?
You know, I never generated an idea for an opera. I mean, first of all, I was always asked to write an opera. And I guess I knew what kind of piece I wanted to write, but the general, atmosphere of it. But as for the story, I've done the 4 pieces for the stage that I've done have all been with Mark Campbell, librettist. And I've always just gone to Mark and said, look, this is what I'm thinking of. What kind of stories could we go to? And he'll come back with 2, 3 ideas about different stories, and then we'll just hone in on one and say, okay, this is the one. Except for later the same evening, which was, really the brainchild of Leon Major at University of Maryland. And he was talking to the National Gallery about doing something together. It was very kind of vague. They didn't know what they wanted to do until they said, let's do something. And it happened that the Hopper exhibit that was traveling around was going to wind up in Washington in fall of '07. So they decided they wanted something that had something to do with Hopper, with Edward Hopper. So Mark looked at many, many paintings and just wrote a story that kind of wove through 5 different paintings. And it was an original story, which I think is really my favorite thing to do. And so that's, that's how that happened. But I never, to date, yet have said, oh, I have this story in my head that I must tell, and, I have to, it's never happened that way for me.
And just to follow up on that, is when you say that you've brought ideas to Mark, or said you've had some idea for him to grab some kind of story out of, what are you bringing to him? Is it sounds, or is it...
No, it's not sounds. It's, for instance, for Volpone, the first opera we did, it's based on Ben Jonson, a play of 1606 or 7, depending on what you read. He had another story, and maybe even another one that he brought to me. I just went to him and said, look, no one, this was in, it went up in '04, so it must have been around 2000 or 2001. And maybe it was 2001. And I said, Wolf Trap has approached me about writing an opera. I don't want to write an iconic story. I don't write about, heroes and, tragedies and things. I want to write a comedy. And it's got to be everybody on stage yelling at each other all the time. It's got to be fast. It's got to be dark. It's got to be just, this is the kind of piece that I want to. And so he then started thinking about what story would actually. I had in my head, I have certain favorite operas. I'm not an opera person. I am not an opera fan. There are certain operas that I love. You won't find me at the Met or on the line standing, any of that stuff. Or reading the blogs or any of that nonsense. I've been around opera for a while, being married to an opera singer. And between Marriage of Figaro and Falstaff, I said, I want to do something in that world. Because I adore those pieces. And we've written actually 3 comedies. Later the Same Evening is really not a comedy. It's got some light moments, but and I do think that no one was writing comedies, and it was just open prairie at that, and I think that you don't have to write. You could be deadly serious with a comedy. You really can. It's just because there are laughs doesn't mean it's not a serious piece.
Right. And I actually jumping off of that, I also want to ask all 3 of you, of all the different genres one could pick, as you're saying, Beth, to tell a story, if there's a story that has to be told, it could be told any number of genres. And I'm wondering, in the process of developing or thinking about creating a new opera, what is it possible to define or to talk about what it is that makes something like an operatic project? Why should it be on an opera stage instead of being done in any of these other mediums? Or is there an indication for each of you as you're looking for projects, you as you're taking on projects or helping to develop them, and John as you're searching for ideas, is there something that signals this will work really well as an opera, this should be created as a new opera rather than as, or a music theater piece? I want to put that up there too, because I sometimes actually have a problem with the word opera as well, I think. But that's my own bag. But I'm wondering if there's something actually that you could each, if there's a way to kind of get at that.
I think the opera, the themes are big, the themes are large, and the experiences of the characters in this situation call for a heightened speech. I mean, just going back to the basic premise of why someone will go on stage and sing their lines rather than recite them. So the challenges are bigger, the stakes are higher, the emotions are higher, and when you're at that level, it just leads naturally to sung words. So things that are big, and those are, by and large, good opera subjects, I think, as in the broadest sense.
Jim, are there projects you've seen that seem more operatic or like less suitable to being created as
I think there has to be a high degree of drama in any opera that we produce. I think, as Beth said, the story has to be high.
Mm-hmm.
It has to be relevant, I think. As we develop new operas, we can't continue to tell stories that happened in mid-18th century Italy, for example. Some of them are quite good, obviously, but there's, especially in the American vernacular, there's so much that we need to tell. And opera is a great vehicle for doing that.
John?
You know what? For instance, later the same evening that we just did at Glimmerglass this summer, there's nothing terribly big happening. There's really hardly anything happening in that opera. There's a woman who's not making it in New York as a dancer. She's leaving, and she's standing up the guy who's about to propose to her. There's a widow who's going on her first date. There's a gay guy who's a teacher in Lynchburg, Virginia, who comes to New York to see a show, and he discovers New York, and he says, "No, I want to stay here." We're not talking about Wotan here. These are actually very mundane things.
But they are stories people relate to.
They're stories that I don't think you need to have a gigantic, emotional, bodice-ripping experience to be operatic. And there's that word operatic. I mean, I think when you talk about opera and music theater, it's simply, to me, it's a technical issue.
Mm-hmm.
It's simply the way people sing. And in music theater, people have music theater voices. In opera, they have operatic voices. It's a completely different technique. And I gravitate towards opera because, in fact, the technique that singers use to sing opera are actually very akin to the technique that singers would sing Gershwin shows back in the 20s.
When they sang acoustically.
When they sang acoustically with no, people weren't whispering into body mics and, booming all over they actually had a technique that carried their voice to the last row. That's the difference.
If we think of small stories or just normal people stories, I think of Puccini, I think of the Bohème, I think of a Tosca, though that gets a little bigger. So if you think of something like a Bohème, but yet you have big opera voices singing these little stories, very intimate little stories, how do you reconcile those two things together?
There's no need to. You're in the opera house, or you're in the theater, and once you establish the ground rules of what you're listening to, you forget about it. This is what we're doing. These are the singers. This is the orchestra. This is the story, and then you're in it. That's and it's the same thing when you go to a music theater piece. It's you're in that world.
Mm-hmm.
I even don't know about the idea of heightened emotion and must be driven into song, because that's actually, for instance, West Side Story. The reason that Bernstein didn't consider it an opera is because that last scene, where Maria takes the gun, the whole thing is spoken. I mean, it's where the whole piece is going to, and there's no music because he couldn't find any music for it. He didn't think that it was appropriate there. So, you know, but is it a piece like that now? Would that be considered an opera? It's pretty big.
It has been done as opera.
So what's
Yeah.
the difference?
Oh, no.
Well, not to turn this into a discussion.
Right, right.
That's Jose, that's
Right.
next.
Right.
Yeah.
Right, I'm going to get in trouble if
Right,
I keep
right.
going in this direction, actually. But so to actually slightly derail the conversation back to the track we were on, maybe to say, as you're developing a new piece, as a new piece is being workshopped and developed, I wonder where the audience fits into this process. And by that I mean not only when is it useful to bring an audience into the process, but I also mean, and maybe this is more directed like at John as a composer and at Beth as a director, does the audience actually come into the process before you've even started writing or developing the piece? Like at what stages does an audience enter into the process of developing work? Both conceiving of it, and then once you have something down, when is it actually helpful to bring in an outside perspective to see what's happening with what you're working with?
Well, from my own experience, I think it's very, very helpful to have an audience, especially when you're dealing with comedy, because the way things have sifted out is that opera is for terribly serious things. Broadway and music theater is for comedy. And in the world of Broadway and music theater, you have previews. And you get to see your piece over and over and over again on different audiences. And so that you could say, okay, Monday's audience, this bit didn't work. Tuesday audience really dug it. Wednesday's audience was so. Thursday, when you write an opera, you have two, I mean, what I always had was 2 workshops, and you bring in some people, and it's really very hard to, you have 3 performances basically, in your typical opera house, and you have to gauge, before that, what's funny, what's not, what's going to work, what's not, and so you see 3 performances, and you see one particular bit that doesn't go with 3 different audiences, then you say, oh, we've got to change that, but you've already written the piece, so. I don't know what the answer is in terms of that, to be able to have an audience be present, to just watch the audience watch the piece. That's very, very useful. I don't know how that could be done, actually, the way opera companies
Maybe
operate.
Beth and Jim, you could talk about
Yeah, I
other
think
ways that you've worked towards.
it's great if it could be done at a workshop level and have an audience and have a forum after where the audience can ask questions about the piece. So it's less about critiquing, let's say, just hearing one act or maybe 2 or 3 big scenes, at least minimally a half hour's worth of material, maybe 45 minutes or an hour. But it's great to have the audience ask questions, things that they don't understand, things that maybe worked, rather than really hear critiques about it. That's very useful to the composer, to the librettist, to the director. And also to hear it live, to hear how that piece works in a space, which is so different than it ever is on the page. John, both composers, surprised at the way pieces sound after you've written them, or are there some elements of surprise that you didn't expect once human beings get to touch them and realize them?
You mean in the singing of them or in the audience response?
Both things, things that you didn't
In the
expect would
singing,
happen.
you always change little things. You say, oh, this note is, maybe this syllable isn't right on this, or this tempo is a little too fast, or the little tiny things
Yeah.
that, just for clarity. But in terms of the audience, I'm always surprised when there's something that you consider actually a very serious moment and somebody laughs.
Yeah.
You say, what's funny here? And then the opposite is that you have a joke that just goes, just like the Hindenburg, you can't tell.
Yeah.
And that's the thing. It could be one audience, could be one way. Another one could be another way. And if you have a run of however many weeks that a Broadway show has, that's plenty of time to tweak things. But we just don't have that. We don't have it.
It is important to bring the audience in at the very beginning. We often have, when we first develop operas, we will often have what we call prima la parole, first the words, where we just have a libretto reading, and Carlin Glenn, who runs the Actors Studio, conducts these for us. And we will hire actors, not musicians, to actually read these operas. And if the libretto doesn't work, then the opera's not going to work. So the librettist has a chance to tweak the libretto so it can go forward to the next stage. And when we actually preview operas as a workshop, ateliers we call them, just as Beth said, we perform these with piano. Then afterwards, everybody has a chance to come together. We have a little wine. Everybody has the chance to mingle and talk to the composer and the librettist about the work and about what can be improved. And as John said, watching an audience reaction is very, very important. And it's not the same every night, as you know. And
No, not at all.
So, I don't think that's good or bad. It just happens.
Yeah,
But it's important for the composer and the librettist to see these reactions.
absolutely.
But I wonder too about the process of developing something where I do think that this is an issue that is getting addressed. I see it being addressed more and more, especially in the more lean and mean companies that can put on, that are focusing on doing contemporary work, putting on more workshops, doing more sort of audience feedback things. But I'm wondering too about, it is different than something like a Broadway show where you have a series of previews. The piece actually gets performed over and over again, night after night, in a compressed situation where the creative team is actually sort of in a kind, rather than doing a sort of one outing of a workshop and then actually leaving the piece for sometimes a very long stretch of time before you come back to it. And I'm wondering, each of you, about the difference, the strengths and weaknesses of actually that, and if that's something that still needs to be addressed, or,
We've previewed operas several times, or conducted them as workshops, the same opera, until it is ready for performance. I think the problem with a preview system for operas is it's just so expensive. Our per service for our orchestra is $200.
Right.
And so you have a series of previews, unless you do them with piano, but if you have a series of previews,
Right.
you've eaten up a huge amount of your budget, or all of your budget,
Sure.
just in previews.
Sure.
And
It's not possible.
Yes, it's just
It's
not.
not
yeah.
possible.
Right. Would it be advantageous?
Oh,
Absolutely.
yes, yes.
It's not
Yeah,
possible.
without hesitation.
Yeah, what we call opening night for a new opera is, John, I mean, you've both been there as composers. It's a pretty scary event. I mean, things are up and running and it's polished, but we always need more time. We have to work with such ridiculously short rehearsal periods. 3 weeks in a studio generally, a week on stage if you're lucky, technical time, and then it's opening night. And for a new piece, you need much more time than that. You think back to all the new pieces that were premiered and that were not successes. Well, I think back probably they didn't have time either. They got caught short. I think of the Butterfly premiere or the Carmen premiere, and they didn't go over very well. And they're probably these were new big pieces, and it was probably just not enough rehearsal time. I think you need time in opera.
And Beth, I wonder for you as a director, if you could talk a little bit about what do you see. What is the role of the director in developing a new piece with a composer and a librettist? I mean, obviously, it's a very different one than
Yes.
when you're taking on directing an
Sure.
opera that has existed for some time.
I think the director is in charge of keeping the big picture in mind, because I think librettists and composers, they work moment to moment, and I feel like sometimes I'm almost like GPS. I have to sort of guide the whole work, because it's easy to get lost in the details, perhaps. Not for everyone. Also, in terms of just the big structure of things, if you have a 3-act structure, there's certain things that, as audience members, we like to happen. It doesn't mean that the opera has to follow these traditional dramatic curves, but there are just things that are just important about a work. Bringing an Act 2 curtain, how that's going to happen. What are the events that's going to set up the rest of the opera, and paying attention to those things, and just keeping the big picture in mind. Also, having the experience of thousands of hours in rehearsal situations. Knowing what works well with choruses, with small scenes, with offstage singing, just the logistics of how things get done and performed and rehearsed in an opera house, which are big things. The other thing, in addition to keeping the big picture in mind, I think the director is good as, I always think of the director as the balancer. There's so much information coming across the footlights to an opera audience. you think about a big orchestra, the language, sometimes in another language in America, we're all Americans, so we compose American opera, all of the visual elements of set, costume, lighting, and so all that information that's going across the footlights at a great distance also, and you really have to balance that, so the audience member should never be required more than to get to their seat on time, fasten their seatbelt, and just go along for the ride. And I think when an audience member has to look on stage and find where someone's singing, then we're in trouble, we haven't done our work. So we balance not only how an opera is rehearsed and produced, but the big picture of how a libretto might take shape, and keeping those big things in mind. I think that's important. And that should be early on in the process also. As the libretto is being written, perhaps 1 or 2 acts are ready, or maybe the 3rd act, and just even before, I'm a firm believer that a libretto should be pretty much complete before a composer writes a note. How do you guys feel?
How do you feel about that, John?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
The first Volpone was not. We did the 1st act, and then the 2nd. And you run into these situations where, for instance, somebody was singing a lullaby and got interrupted because couldn't remember the rest of it. So I wrote, this little interrupted thing, and I had no idea that another character was going to finish it in the last scene. So I might have written it differently, if I knew there was going to be a 2nd act.
Right.
That's the only time that the complete libretto wasn't done. But no, I would like to have. I think the director should be on board from the very beginning. Now, having done 4 of them, I think that I would also want the set designer in from the very beginning and have a reading of the complete libretto. For instance, we ran into something in the Volpone, the first opera. There was a character that showed up too early, so he was the servant Mosca was going to say, "Oh, you have to go and wait in the library while I do something else," because he had to get rid of him off stage, and he was supposed to be upstage somewhere. Then I get a call from Leon, the director, saying, I just saw the set designs, and he has to leave the stage, climb a ladder, open a window, and there wasn't enough time for him to do that. So we had to write about 40 seconds worth of extra thing. It actually turned out much better because it gave the character on stage an opportunity to turn to the audience and say, "You think this is going to mess me up? Now watch what I do with this." It was a wonderful tear down the fourth wall moment for it. But for instance, in The Inspector, the libretto said the first scene starts in town square, and then it's supposed to go to the mayor's office, and it says a long table and chairs slide on. How long does that take? How much noise does it make? All kinds of questions like that.
Right.
And now I would want to know that up front. I would want to point to that at a meeting with everybody there and say to the set designer, how is this going to happen? How long does this take to happen? Because I've got to know that.
Right, and I think what I'm hearing kind of from both of you, and also Jim, just a second, something you said earlier about the having the libretto read through with actors. That was actually something that one of the pieces that I've been working on that's being developed with American Opera Projects. That was something that Charles Jardin sort of pushed on Kelly and I, which I was like, well, I mean, fine, sure, if it'll make Charles happy, we'll do it. Like, that was really what I was thinking. Like, why do we need to do this? It was actually really helpful to hear
What was
that.
helpful? I'm sorry.
To have the libretto read through by an actor before actually doing any setting to music, to see how the libretto actually paced out before dealing with music. But then the other thing that I'm hearing is from all of you is that it seems that it's incredibly beneficial in developing new work that some kind of a team is already together, that your collaborators are there, that that you have sort of your group together as you dig into doing the new piece, rather than that tends to be more successful for developing a new piece, rather than a composer going out in isolation, starting to create a work and then trying to find people to come into it. Does that sound, or am I putting words in all of your mouth?
That's the ideal, but more often than not, it is the composer who's got the opera already written, trying to pull people together. At least in my experience.
Right.
And there's an awful lot of good operas out there that could benefit from collaboration.
And then I'm wondering if we could, before I shift to questions from the audience, I'm wondering if we could talk a little bit about what kind of resources, obviously there are a lot of challenges in developing new work, but what kind of resources do exist or have existed for you as each of you have been bringing new work out? Obviously, Jim, you actually are one of those resources.
Yes.
But I'm wondering if you could each talk a little bit about resources that exist, both that you've used in projects you've developed and those that you just know about that, given who's in front of us, people here might benefit from knowing.
Certainly, we've been developing operas for as long as we've been in existence. Not everything that we develop gets produced, obviously. But we do have a very viable development program. Once a year we put out a call for scores and libretti that librettists and composers can submit the operas to us. And as I mentioned at the beginning of the discussion, we received 73 just recently. And that's very daunting to have to go through 73 operas and realize that people have put years of their life, or at least months of their life into writing an opera. And they come from the young and the old and the famous and not so famous. But they all want their opera produced. That's their goal. So we select a number of those that we can put forward through our development program, beginning with the Prima La Prole series, and that's, as I say, the libretto reading. We do these at the New York Society Library, which is a very lovely venue on the east side. It's not an opera house. We purposely take them out of a opera venue and put them in a literary venue. And it works very well. The librettos seem to enjoy it. We get a different crowd. We get a literary crowd, not an opera crowd, for these readings. But they are very beneficial. And from there, then we'll offer the development series with piano. And we'll bring a team together. We have a resident director for these series. She'll bring very talented singers. We use as good as singers as we can afford, and go through a process of actually rehearsing these works. The composer knows it's not a finished product. We don't spend months and months and months rehearsing this, but they get to hear the operas done professionally for the first time, even though it is just with piano, no orchestra. And it's extremely beneficial to them. And as I say, then we have the series afterwards, where we have a question and answer with the audience. They get to mingle with the composer and the librettist, and that feedback is extremely beneficial. And I think that's one of the best things that we can do for a composer, is to provide a professional hearing for the first time. AOP has a very good program. American Lyric Theater has a very good program, but all three are very different. I'm sure there's others out there too. But all three of us have different approaches to this, but we all try to get to the same end result.
And Beth?
Yeah, I wanted to mention the other two big companies, or small companies in New York that do the same kind of work as American Opera Projects, AOP, which they're fantastic. And Lois would know how many years they've been in existence, over 20 years.
I joined up with them 20 years ago. I'm just a fan.
But they keep going. I know they have one work that they're bringing to, I forget the name of the work, they're bringing it over to London, to Royal Opera, Covent Garden, because they have a new works program. And then the universities are the other great resource in America. John mentioned a major at the University of Maryland who's developed a bunch of John's work and some other things. I'm working on an opera now called The Scarlet Letter by Laurie Layton, which was first commissioned by the University of Central Arkansas. So universities that you wouldn't think of that are commissioning operas and getting them produced, even at the university level, which is an important service. Where it's really lacking is at the professional opera level house. The Met has some mysterious program with Lincoln Center Theater. I know one work has come out of it, one finished work, which is the Nico Muley, was it Two Boys that came out of that? That went to
Yes.
that went to London and was supposed to come here. There have been other names and combinations of people that have been talked about. I don't know what other concrete work has come out of it. But I don't know of the big opera houses, or even within the young artist programs attached to these big opera houses, that are developing new work, that will commission composers, librettists, that will have readings, that will have workshops. And they should, because it's such an invaluable part of a singer's developmental process also. I mean, singers who do new works are so much the better for it, even if the works don't succeed. Minnesota is one, yes, thank you. Minnesota has that.
And I would say
program.
Houston actually too.
Yep.
Doing, I've actually just received a commission from Houston Grand Opera for their
yeah.
HGO
Yes,
program.
Houston.
They're doing, they've actually taken on, they're doing commissioning 2 chamber operas a year for the next 3 years that are each focusing on the intersection between an East Asian culture and the city of Houston. Because a few years ago they identified that there's this huge huge immigrant population from all these different parts of East Asia that are in Houston, and they wanted to somehow connect to the community around them. And so they've been commissioning a series of operas where either the composer or the librettist comes from whichever country they're focusing on in that piece, and then they bring two people together and create a chamber opera, and they perform throughout the city. So there are a few, but you're right.
There are a few. There's Houston, there's Minnesota, and Santa Fe just came out and announced 3 new operas. But at the same time, considering it's a very small fraction of the opera companies in America that should be producing new works every year, should be commissioning, and they're workshopping. And again, especially in development, not only of composers and librettists, but young singers who have a chance to work with composers, and which is such a fantastic thing, because they get to do roles for the first time, and also with a composer, you can ask for, well, can you just adjust this little passage for my voice? It's very nice. And it works both ways.
I have to say, sometimes I wish I was working with Verde, though.
Oh, well.
Those composers can be hard.
Yeah, you got to choose the right composers.
Yeah, exactly.
I think that's part of it. But I think the opera companies, they should have more of a responsibility in not only commissioning works, but workshopping things and really supporting American composers. Sorting about it. We need new works. I mean, more than anything else, it's nice to have a new Traviata. It's nice to have a new Turandot. It's interesting. It's wonderful, but we need new American works, and we have tremendously gifted composers, writers in this country who need a home, who need an artistic home, who need salaries, who need a place to experiment, to hear works, and without the pressure of a big opera house, to do a workshop with piano and take time with it, with great young singers, and see what's out there, and then develop it further. And I feel like the opera companies, the major ones, really have to pick up that mantle in a more serious way. I look at the Met, and I remember reading last spring about all kinds of articles about James Levine's 40th anniversary, and the statistics are fantastic and blah blah blah. But under his tenure, there were 4 or 5 new operas in 40 years. Nothing yet.
4 or 5.
Yep. That's it.
I don't remember what that meant.
Oh. 4 or 5.
Commissioned or just done?
The commission.
Commission.
Yeah.
That goes to this side.
As a producer, the pressure to find money is so hard. I mean,
Sure,
extremely well, and I know I'm going to take a beating every time I do something. I mean,
Right.
it's part of my DNA. I know that, so it doesn't bother me. But a traditional opera company, the big ones, they need to raise about 50% of their budget through earned revenue. So they put on an opera, and it's a tremendous risk for them. And believe me, you're preaching to the choir here.
Mm-hmm.
But I see the challenges they all face, and I know why they make these decisions. It's not the right decision, but I know why they make them. The gentleman who founded CCO 30 years ago, Richard Marshall, was fired from. He founded Opera Carolina, which most people don't know. He didn't find it, but he was one of he was that first general director. He and Robert Ward, but he produced Robert Ward's Crucible and got fired as a result because they lost so much money. And then the Crucible has gone on to be one of the greatest American operas ever produced.
We have to invest in composers also. It doesn't happen overnight.
No, it doesn't.
Introducing a new composer or a new opera, but it's really the future of the medium, especially in America.
John, are there any resources that or any specific resources or things that you've had access to in developing your pieces that you feel like would be helpful?
No, as I said before, I was always approached to make an opera, so
Right.
everything was already in place.
Mhm.
So I don't really know anything about that.
I'm wondering if we have questions out here from anyone in the house. Yep.
I'd like to ask about the rehearsal process and how much the music stays the same or is flexible during this process, because writing the music takes a very long time. I assume I'm not a composer, but I've worked with composers. And the rehearsal time is very short, but sometimes you discover stuff only during the rehearsal process, which affects how the writing should have been. My question is, like, concerning this relation, concerning this flexibility or rigidity of a score?
My operas, I've done two, one for Leon at the university, two for Kim. The other one was for NIFAS, New York Festival of Song. It was kind of its own thing. It was a one act, and it was not, they're not an opera company. But we've always had 2 week-long workshop periods for each opera. And you go, you run the opera. Basically, it's story that and the way the piece is behaving, and no, it's never, oh, this music isn't appropriate for this or anything like that. It's how is the story being told? Is this confusing? Is this, is it too slow here? Is it, it's always a libretto that we're and the story, the way the story is being told, that we're all focusing on. And when we find a problem, we mark it out and say, okay, here, this could be do it, and the librettist goes back and say, okay, I'm going to change this, I'm going to change this, I'm going to change this, and sends me the changes, and then I rewrite the music. It's really not it's not a big deal, and they're not huge things. It's funny, the smallest thing can make a huge difference in the way a piece is behaving on stage, and so long as it's during the workshop period, you go back and you fix it. And then the second workshop is, you do one act in the first workshop, and then you do both acts and run the whole piece in the second workshop. Once the changes, if you have to go back to a piece during the run, if there's something that really bothers you, or if the piece is going up again and the parts are already done, that's where it starts to get complicated, because you wind up making cuts, making changes, reorchestrating, then you have to make new parts, and it gets very, very complicated. It's doable, it's fine, but these are things where in the music theater world they would have been ironed out during previews,
Hi, I'm Joe Cohn. I'm a composer. I'm in the midst of fairly early stages of an opera project of a wonderful librettist, and she's pretty much finished the libretto, and I'm beginning to start the music. We're not yet hooked up with a company. We're beginning to raise some money, and I think I might be able to raise some money. And I was just wondering if we are able to raise any money. What is the best way, to have a workshop of it would be something like that, or to approach a company and say, hey, we have some funds and you want to take us on, or is there how, what would be a step? I guess maybe you could answer the question if you have money or if you don't have money.
It really doesn't matter. I have to say, there's a lot of operas that do have money, but it's never influenced. I have to say personally, it's never influenced my decision to produce it or not, or even develop it or not. In a perfect world, somebody would come to me for, say, I've got $1 million to do this opera, and it's a great opera, but that never, that it really doesn't happen. But everybody in this audience knows that people pay to play. There's a lot of operas done by even some of the most famous opera houses that the composer has paid for everything. And it's very tempting, I have to say, but it's just been my personal policy not to let that influence the decision. I think it's beneficial to you to raise money to workshop the opera before you present it.
I'm asking not so much
Yes.
in terms of influencing
Yes.
your decision.
I think that would be very, very good if you could raise the money to do that.
Right.
I would say, just to jump on that question a little bit, as a young composer who's usually a pretty scrappy self-starter, both by choice and also not by choice.
Mm-hmm.
The project that I was referring to earlier, Our Basic Nature, which is being developed with Nautilus Music Theater and American Opera Projects. There's a few AOP people here. That was born out of, and this also kind of addresses how flexible can you be with the music, at least in my experience. That was born out of 3 friends who wanted to find an excuse to work together because we live in different cities, and if we were working together, then we had an excuse to be at the bar together. And and we had this idea for a piece that we really wanted to do, but it was all born out of I wanted to write a piece for this baritone, Andrew Wachowski, and Kelly and I wanted to create a piece for him. And then we went out and we're fortunate enough to find AOP, and we're fortunate enough to find Nautilus that could help in some respects with workshopping, but there were other elements of it that we wanted to get moving ourselves, and so we pulled together a Kickstarter campaign, raised some money, mostly through friends, family, and contacts, but also from professional contacts that helped us bring in a chamber group, Redshift, who was another good group of friends, basically. But that first round of workshopping we did was pretty much, with the help of AOP and Nautilus, was a kind of self-started project. But the goal was to get some kind of workshop out of it that would get us to learn something, but also give us some usable kind of media as the piece continued getting shopped around with other producers, which is where we're in conversations with right now. And then the ancillary benefit of this was that I was never expecting, is that after we did this first workshop, which AOP and Nautilus helped us do, and we did some fundraising on our own, we did this workshop performance at the Green Space, things went really well, and then a week later is when I got a call from Houston. And they would have never called me if I hadn't done that before. So I do think actually there is much to be said, especially where we're at now, just in the current climate. There's a lot to be said for self-producing if you have support, or some level of self-producing. If I think, for me, that project was so strong, and I just felt so passionate about it, and I was able to carve out the time for it, that we figured out a way to get get ourselves off the ground a little bit, and then we were fortunate enough to have two companies come in and help us go further. So I don't know if that really answers the question.
Yeah, no, that's very, very cool.
Hi, my name is Ellen Frankel. I'm a librettist, and I'm working on a new work that's going to be performed by the Center City Opera Theater called Slaying the Dragon in June at the next Conference of Opera America. And this is my first opera, and what's interesting is that the librettist feels to me like a stepchild in the whole process. I went to Instant Encore to sort of start a website. You could fill in that you were a singer, a composer, a director, all sorts of roles. There was nothing I had to be other. And the same thing was true when I signed up for workshops at Opera America's conference in Boston last year. There was no slot for librettist.
Opera
I'm sorry, Opera America, and I was the only librettist who went to the creative, you there too? The creative weekend, that was the creative artist experience beforehand. There was nothing for librettists there either. And I'm looking for new opportunities to do libretti, and do librettists ever approach opera companies first,
yes,
or does it usually come from the composer?
Very often they approach us first, and we're happy to see that, yes.
And John, as John mentioned, actually, the ideas for your 4 projects, for all your works for the stage, actually were in some way librettist initiated first, right? Or Mark came to you with the story idea. Together you developed them.
We talked about it.
Yeah.
The opera company came to me,
And then Mark,
we discussed what to do.
Yeah, may I say, at our next Prima La Parole series, 2 of the libretti we're presenting have no composers.
Yeah, I think I'm an artist, writer, and librettist, and I think that's actually an enormous problem. I think that the storytelling aspect and what seems to be a sort of a disconnect between the sensitivity to story in film, television, and the most extraordinary children's books that are being done today, and what seems to be story as stepchild in an opera is pretty nuts, to be frank. And I think, particularly when I look at this issue, the constant, $64,000 question, or $64 million question in this case, is how do we attract a young audience? And when I look at the subject matter that is, in many cases, addressed, I don't see a lot of energy put into attracting a younger audience. I mean, I look at the sort of thing that the National Theatre did with War Horse, with Coram Boy. Coram Boy did not do well in this country because they put it out as an adult piece, which was never intended to. But these were pieces that were very powerful, that were designed specifically to get a young audience used to the idea of going to theater. They have very strong musical elements in both pieces, and they've been smashing successes. And not by accident, there were pieces that were based on extraordinary young adult novels. So part of the thing I'm looking at is what seems to be this real disconnect between the reality of trying to attract a young audience and much of the subject matter that is being put on stage, which strikes me as being not very likely to speak to the condition of a younger audience. And I think the point that Beth made earlier about stories that really are burning to be told is one that sometimes is not getting addressed. Anne Midgett wrote, if that's her name, wrote a rather interesting column several months or a year ago about opera that gets done by commission, generally not being opera that survives the test of time. So I hope I haven't offended anybody, but I do think this is an issue. I think great stories will attract an audience. And I think we really need to start putting a hell of a lot of energy into telling great stories, because we are competing against extraordinary storytelling in many different areas.
Sure.
So
I'm wondering if, I think we have time for these two last questions, actually. Lois, you have a question.
Well, actually, it was a comment. I've been going to the opera for 6 years, and I've seen a lot of new works, and it was The Crucible that I saw. I don't even know who did it. I went, and then all of a sudden a whole new world was open to me, and I tend to go to new things. I have, there are a ton of operas. I have a list that I've never heard because they've never been done in New York. And for a while I've been able to travel. Now I'm getting older and it's not as easy anymore. But we need to, well, the other thing, my question was about, you two talked about large. 22 years ago, I was at a Central Opera Service convention, and Beverly Sills was asked, what do I have to do to get an opera produced? She was head of New York City Opera at the time. She said, keep it small. And we're seeing smaller, and they're better. For me, the more intimate the theater, the better the production is. And we're seeing a lot of monodramas. Expense is an issue. But I'd like a second opportunity. I have a list of operas I've never heard, and I have a list of operas I've heard and loved, and know I will never hear again. So I don't know what the solution is. I know I will pay a compliment to Opera America, because I think they've been a prime mover in getting things produced.
Yes, absolutely.
The other was a comment about storyline. Almost 20 years ago, I inadvertently sat next to the composer Bill Mayer at a New York City Opera production, and his wife asked me, I didn't know who they were, his wife asked me what I thought of the opera, and I said, I don't understand. More American opera should be based on great American literature. And now I'm sorry I said it, because somebody listened. I am getting so tired of all these movies, which are designed to attract a young audience. They're all movie people, the young audiences. They all grow up on these terrible movies. I'm not a movie person, as you gather, but I'm not interested in those. And I also remember Arthur Miller, when asked a similar question, and somebody said to him, well, he was on a panel with the Crucible and Richard Marshall and Robert Ward, and he told Robert Ward to rearrange the scenes to make it more dramatic for an opera. And he told me that Arthur Miller, he was raised in a family that knew opera. They listened to opera, they went to the opera. Why was Death of a Salesman not done? It was actually by an Italian badly. Arthur Miller said, because it's already an opera.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm afraid some of these movies that are being made into, were already operas.
I just want to grab this last question back there, and I think we might be out of time. Although well, we can get these two questions. So
I
no,
wanted-
you're fine.
I wanted to ask, since the three of you are involved in developing new things, that means that new ideas, librettos, come across your desk. I'd love to hear what turns you off to ideas that are presented to you. Things where, but really, you know, because everyone is thinking of ideas that they'd like to create, or they're envisioning an opera they'd like to compose. What things, when they come to you and you go, I don't think so. I would love to hear what turns you, you know, away from an idea. You know.
For me, sometimes I think it's less the idea than the quality of writing.
Uh-huh.
And that's something that I react to immediately. Either a libretto it's solid from the get-go in terms of its poetic style, in terms of its verse, its structure, that makes the story compelling for me. So I think that's what I react to first.
Yes, that, you know, it's interesting to see these submissions. You know, when I look at these, I say, is this opera going to be relevant in New York and Cleveland and Los Angeles? So often people write things that are very, very specific to a region, and you know that's not going to travel. You know, you can't take a opera that takes place in Greenwich Village so much and take it to Tuscaloosa. You know, a gentleman submitted an opera based on the life of Martin Luther. Now, that was very important to him. It was like, you know, reading the Reformation Symphony all over again. But you know, there would be no chance of that. You know, no chance of anybody producing that. But you know, he had spent years writing this opera. So you know, themes that are universal, themes that are relevant, those things are important. Themes that aren't universal or themes that aren't relevant aren't so important. And then, of course, the quality of the music too. I mean, some composers, you know, shouldn't quit their day job.
John, are there ideas that seem to be more engaging for you as a composer, or less engaging for you as a composer, storyline-wise, or?
I just know when something grabs me. That's all. I mean, in terms of Martin Luther, I think that Mission is having a pretty good run with St. Francis of Assisi.
Mm-hmm.
I don't think it's the subject matter so much as how the story is told and how it's, I don't know. Look at standard operas and four people in Paris, one of them with consumption. How does that play in Tuscaloosa? What do they know about that?
But it's the tunes that carry those operas.
Yes. Yes.
Not the story.
No.
Well,
It's the combination of
if
things.
somebody can hum something, if somebody can hum something from the Crucible, I give them $1.
I don't know, I've never heard the Crucible. I don't know that piece, but it's the combination. It's the story, how it is told, and musically,
Yeah.
and how it just, you can't separate them.
Ray, you had a question.
You know, Jim Schaefer, in your introductory remarks, you alluded to the producibility of operas.
Right.
What are some of the criteria?
The number one is expense, and no one wants to talk about dollars, but it's what drives so many of these decisions that we've been decrying tonight. No one wants to do Traviata every year, but they are forced to. So when I see an opera that has an orchestra of 60, I know right away, unless I can talk to that composer about reducing those forces, there's no chance at all of it being done by the Center for Contemporary Opera. We just can't afford it. Some composers will write operas with extensive choruses. Again, that's a big problem for us. The intimacy of an opera is important to us. If an opera can be done on a smaller scale, that's better for us. So these are the things I look for, at least in my personal experience running a small opera company.
And do you encourage small forces?
I do. If a composer or librettist will call me, I will tell them what will make an opera attractive to us. I mean, notwithstanding the quality of the story and the music itself, but just, as I say, the producibility of it. Does it require a harp? These things are all important because no one thinks about cartage fees except for the general director. No one thinks about doubling fees except for the general director. So when they write a part that requires the clarinetist to play bass clarinet and E-flat clarinet, well, it's can be a problem.
Was there any last burning questions? There's still.
I actually do have a question
Sure.
in terms of the role of the singer in this entire new works world. How do you guys go about finding your singers for workshops? And is that the earliest level that a singer can be involved in the work? I know you were talking about writing something specifically for a singer,
Right.
but I'm just wondering if each of you could maybe elaborate on that.
We put out a general call for auditions just like any other company, and in fact that's going on right now, and already we've had about 180 applicants for those auditions, and we'll be able to cast for our main stage productions no more than 10, and for our workshops maybe another 20 on top of that. And many of them have established careers. Now, we did Michael Delera's The Secret Agent just recently, and John's wife Amy Burton sung. Obviously we didn't ask her to come and audition for us. But for other roles, we have open auditions, and I certainly encourage singers to come, and we try to hear as many as possible. And because you never know what kind of talent you're going to find out there that may not have a track record of singing in some of the larger companies.
American Opera Projects has auditions also given the best.
Yeah, I think most composers have a circle of singers that they can rely on, that they trust, that they work with, and on a very informal basis. Come over and sing through something, or I'd like to make a demo of this, or and John happens to be married to a wonderful singer, so that makes it a little easier for him. But
and there's a tradition of that too.
Yeah.
Composers
And
Well,
they're pals. Mozart, they used to hang out and drink and.
but I would say, you're probably in good luck if you're a singer who wants to do new work, because there's certainly no shortage of composers who are interested in finding performers to collaborate with. Thanks everyone for coming this evening. Thank you so much, the three of you, for spending the night talking a little bit about creating new work. And I think there's some sort of reception that's going to happen over here, so there's no reason to go anywhere too quickly.
It's nice to meet you finally. Yeah. I know John Eaton.
yeah. He's great, John.
Yeah, I love him. Yeah.
Right.
Oh. Yes. He is a genius.
He is a genius.
Yes, he's
It's really.
Oh, I don't know. I know. Yeah, it is. Yeah. Yes, I do. You would never think somebody like him. Right?
I thought the set for later that same evening at across the sky. That production in general, which was the same as it. Images of me. Although it wasn't, it wasn't terrible. You could, because the house isn't that big, so you could sort of, but you're right, you couldn't see that sort of thing. I thought that was everything about the way that piece of it was so intricate and Leon's agreed.
They're going to be out on November 20th. November 20th to 21st next year. Yeah, I was telling you.
Yeah, so it's a little longer. No, I think I'm going to try to repeat. It's great.
Cool. I'll say my goodbyes.
Great.
So,
That's nice because so many young singers now are trained in how to sing. There's a whole lot different from singing.
You did a lot of
what people work on, and that's what I would like about it.
Spent outside of school,
And I find it surprising.
Well, I mean, you've been doing it, you know you're in the right place there.
There was an obligation.
The people. Family. People's dynamic with each other.
Because
what's
you
interesting.
have a mother and you have a father. And, I mean,
Well, unfortunately, we're not. We've kind of outgrown that place now, and it's So I think we're going to go to Symphony Space now, because we've had a history there. And we have workshops in that downstairs. So there you go.
My first season of Jimmy Stitcher.
Oh yeah, I know. We know. Yeah. Oh great, thanks. Yeah. That's when you can't relate to people because these people just don't get a chance to hear anything. I think your audience is yeah, it's very sympathetic audience.
Okay.
so should we talk sometime? Are you guys?
Sure, be happy to.
Eric's back. I'm going to do a butterfly. I'm going to make town pretty soon. I think on the 5th. Is Eric going to be around?
For now.
I don't live here, as I think.
Oh, I mean, I'm not sure.
And that's part of the problem. I'm only here but we'll have to work schedules.
Yeah.
I'm here at least once a month during the season. It's usually twice a month. So I'm sure there's some time that we can.
Maybe after I get back.
Okay.
Because I'm pretty busy too. I have other stuff happening before then. Why don't I contact you guys after November 15th? I'll touch base. So your season is where do you produce new pieces?
Yeah, that we do, and we have two phases here, the development side and the production side, and we use direct development work. Those are the ateliers. We were talking to Conrad about for the past 3 years, we've been a really small theater, about 70-seat theater in Chelsea.
Yeah.
But we've just outgrown. I mean,
it's too small.
We have people love these things, so I need to find a larger space. So that's the issue, and that's my job Friday is to go. But I think we're going to end up at Symphony Space.
Yeah. I think because the space I have is small. It's Players Club actually.
Yeah, we need a.
It's too small.
It's too small for the performances, too small for the audience, and people standing up, and that's not. I mean, it's good.
It's not. No, it's not good for them.
It's not good for them to stand up for 2 hours.
Well, touch base.
Yeah, please. Yeah. Nice to meet you. Yeah. Hello. Hi, Jim Schaefer. Nice to meet you.
So you're actually I'm very good friends with Natasha and Mark.
Oh, okay, great. We're having lunch tomorrow.
Oh, okay.
Yes. I will tell her.
So she was actually suggesting
but now it's being.
But you do that only.
Right, we have the call for scores and since we've got this grant, which I'm delighted for, we had to tighten up our because before we had it rolling, somebody sent something, we take a look. Okay, so now we have a deadline and a formal review of people, not only inside CCO but outside CCO. So it's different. For right or wrong, it's good or bad.
I actually didn't know you've done that now, so I'll say that.
But if you just check our website, you'll see the but I think the deadline was May 1st or something. So we'll put the call for scores like January next year and give everybody enough time to together. That's a,
I think this is more the way it is.
sort of a format that we have to see things in. As I say, it's kind of lost some of its formality.
I've been there. Yeah. I've spent some time in I'm from Israel.
From
I
want to tell stories.
Oh yeah,
Get them on stage, and then you know, it's just, you know.
Yeah, I'm such a softie. I still feel so bad for these. They're wonderful works, and there's no way that we can even accommodate, a tenth of them. And it's just such a
wrote, and I mean, you know, and I'm a fairly established composer. I got
sure.
video artists, and yeah, I've been.
Because they're really. I think it's getting better, but it's
not so much.
So few companies that we even are changing into opera. I mean,
but you saw that, but yeah, so some history. I would say.
Yeah, I mean, the big.
That's what I was trying to get.
Interesting things about. No, but I already lived there
for a small place. It's about 250.
And you're here.
Yeah, I'm collaborating with the British
stuff in as I say, the orchestra, every time they sit down, it's $200. And that's not even including the doubling fees and the party fees and the percussion part of it. The percussionists don't have their own percussion, so you got to do that. That's $2,500. Women for just a small 2 or 3 days. That's about, for a Gotham level, us, that's about it. I mean, the Capo, they got their own place, so that doesn't. But if you want to do a game with fly space and a pitch, this is really, I guess, just now Gotham.
That's the idea.
Yeah. Well, no music, just only retro.
Is it like?
Yes,
how many singers?
Well, this should be like 5, 6 women.
Incredible pianist.
So, but so far it feels like a big thing, like orchestra and choir. So, I don't know.
Do you have like an idea of the musical style?
Which I think is different than what
Your expressions.
That's not the same thing. That's a totally different thing.
I just, everything is always related to the subject, the ideas. I do very
fun. I mean, that was the thing we just had. We just want to do it again too.
In this case, it just feels like the basis of it is going to be songs, popular music from the 20s, beginning of 20s. But I do compose I do modification of sound, so I'm thinking about taking some songs, music subjects, make it
We're also not scared whatever to try and say it is like a really
I don't know exactly. There's
not fear exactly.
There's like 2 levels of music.
Yeah, everyone felt like everyone else was at their top.
Recording, manipulated, and the other is live, played or sung.
Well, but it should be heard as a marriage thing, That's always my intention, to get it, integrated as much as possible. What kind of video?
Well, right now the piece we did was about a singer who's lost her voice, and she tries to, she literally can't sing anymore, and then she tries to regain back her voice, and she goes through a laryngoscopy, and you see the vocal cords in the video, and she goes into a duet with her voice. So she's singing.
She's singing about her voice.
It's doubled. She's singing on stage and she's singing in the video. Where you see the vocal cords moving. And it's sort of a duet with herself to the point where, I mean, at the beginning, we create a separation and then we melt it back to one thing again, and we separate it again. So she has a kind of schizophrenic moment. Yeah, I mean, one of the things that interests me is to use video to like see behind the abstract image, because music, especially vocal music, creates this kind of abstract image, and I try to bring something else, like show the reality of it, examine what's happening inside the body. We also did lighting the mouth from inside, so you can watch the tongue, the whole movement of the mouth, so you get like a focus. Yeah, that's something
What exactly? Like getting to the
trying to make visual, create a visual level that operates with the same logic of image.
But that's a very different experience from
to create musical films that are not like pictures that accompany music, or music that's just soundtrack for the scene, but really something that functions like
how the music sounds. So you collaborated with the composer at the very beginning?
We created this project. We created this project in a workshop in Berlin, and got together with the composer for working, and it was sort of back and forth. Music is I will have it very soon. Online. I can send you a link.
Great job.
Here's some examples.
Wonderful moderation.
It's vocal. It's only vocal. And it's, I can say it goes from something like Sprechgesang,
It still doesn't say, it's hard to describe, if you, it's like, I can,
the big,
Young singers.
big old documentary.
Yes!
I didn't see it, but I heard about it. Yeah, that's what I heard. I saw a bunch of reviews from people who were like, just moving people, right? And they were just like,
who's singing?
Oh, she was really nice. And I was like, yeah, tell me about it.
Was she?
She enjoyed going to the doctor and
I'm Lauren. Nice to meet you. Come back.
Thank you so much.
Come back.
About just I was waiting for someone to address the performer issue in any way. You know what I mean? Just like,
it was nice.
Also, someone has to like do that. There's the writing them and the putting them. It's like
Mediate everything. Do you do stuff with the composers a lot? Or
well, I'm learning. That's what I would like to do.
Where are you in school or
I just graduated, so that's why I'm like, now I get to do whatever I want to do.
Yeah.
So let's figure out what that is.
That's true.
And then I'm like, New York is Colorado.
It's kind of awesome.
I think I'm liking it.
So you're in New York?
Yes, I just moved here.
Oh, awesome. Where were you before?
I was at UCLA.
Really?
Yeah, and then prior to that, I was here with my undergraduate. So I'm kind of.
So you're gonna put it online, right?
Now, are you a Californian native?
Yes, I am originally from Los Angeles. flops and all.
Oh, excellent.
Excellent.
Yeah.
Flowy skirt.
Yeah, you know.
Loving it.
And how about yourself?
I went to school for many, many years as a singer, and I'm also worked in music full time. So now I'm officially made the switch to arts administration over at the Met.
Good for you! Work it out.
Yeah. So, how old are you?
I am.
If you don't mind my asking, that's accepted bad. Not full time.
Totally fine.
I'm like, I'm fine with my age, so I'm sure everyone else is. I run the Met competition.
Okay.
So,
Yeah.
so that's why I asked, because I was like, oh, you can audition.
I kind of stay away from it.
I know. I never did it myself.
I kind of stay away from it. I just kind of like, guys.
Are you into opera or are you more into contemporary stuff?
But in Germany, it's interesting because some of those cities
I
are
am
quite small.
into
Singing.
Every little city has an opera.
I think what I'm into is innovative works.
Thank you very much.
I think that's what I'm into.
Awesome. No matter how that's done, whether it's in production or through work.
Exactly.
Very cool.
I'm into that. I think that's where it lies. So, for the the Met competition, I just remember auditioning a couple times.
It wasn't right.
I would get the feedbacks, and they were like, "You're good," and then I hear from other people that they just really wanted to have men that year. Or they just really wanted to, have, and it's just kind of like, okay, but this is not it's not an opera. Like you're not casting.
Right.
So where's the breakdown? Like what's
absolutely
happening? And then I kind of felt like it, and even when I was younger, I was seeing, more like color tour, people that could really just do the fireworks.
The showcase piece.
Yeah, and so I realized I'm not really a competition singer.
There are some people who are competition singers. I mean, there's other people who aren't. I just always hated auditioning.
I kind of don't like auditioning too.
I'm more of a process person. Like, if I feel like I don't know that you like me, then I'm usually probably going to be like, I don't know if I'm good. But when it's like, I feel like you have confidence in me, then I will be confident. Yeah. That's how I always was, at least.
I think I'm just really interested in the performance. I am a performer, and I'm not a flashy, whatever. I'll be fine. I'm a soprano who's fine without singing high notes. Yeah. That's the kind of singer I am. Like, I would rather create a riveting performance as opposed to singing high notes. So the competition thing, but hey, here I am, and I need to do competitions because I need to make money. So it's interesting because now I'm like, okay, what does it take to be this? So that I can go and work with what I like working with, which is the innovative projects that don't have as much funding. So, that's where I am.
You do both at the same time, though, which is
right. That's what I'm realizing I need to do. I need to be that person.
There's all these, the scene in New York right now is just that there are so many self-produced things, and they've almost different composers have kind of formed collectives. You know what I mean? So it's like there'll be this circle of composer that does this, and this circle of composers, or this chamber orchestra that does this. And so it's just going to things and being and friends of friends. I find if you still do Juilliard class, or even
that's what I just got a job from Austin McCormick, the guy's company 15. He was at Juilliard. Met him at the conference. He was like, I have a company now. Do you want to sing? I was like, yeah.
Yes, that's it. And also instrumentalists, because they're all playing. So they're the ones who know. I find
it's like a totally different world in academia. And I'm just I'm like, hi, great, thanks. Glad I paid all that money for you guys to not tell me how to do my job. Well, I'm like, I don't know what to do. I went to pretty good schools. It's not and I went to performing arts high school. I did some pretty good, and I went to
but no one prepares you. They're starting to try. They're starting to try part of that.
And I'm just like, oh, great, glad to know.
Yeah, and now I've got so much student loan debt that yeah.
I'm actually really blessed. I got scholarships, and I have amazing.
We had a picture.
So
I mean, like I went to a state school for undergrad, fantastic state school, but partially so that I could save the money that I saved for grad school. You know, that plus scholarships I was able to get through 8 years of school.
Right. Yeah, long time, right?
Yeah, I couldn't stop going. It's like I will get 2 masters of performance. Why? Because why not?
That's like how,
Yeah.
Because in between Juilliard and UCLA,
Yeah.
I went to Italy and I did like an Italian master's.
Nice.
But like I don't really talk about that. I just don't talk about it. I'm like,
That's hilarious.
that was my other life.
Yeah. People are like, wait, so you can get 2 master's degrees? I'm like, I know, and it can be fascinating. Maybe one of them's not valid, but as long as they don't take both away.
They don't like cancel each other.
Yeah, exactly.
So how are you enjoying working at the Met?
It's good. I've been freelancing for a long time. So it's weird for me just to like be in an office. You know, but I just started this
Okay. So, my friend Sean Harriet just started there too. He actually started like 2 weeks ago.
Wow. Do you know what he's doing?
He is in charge of visas and contracts.
Sean is his name?
Yes. He's black. Here,
I know.
There's not a lot of black people. Sean Gary, he wears bow ties. That's how you can tell. He wears like cute shoes.
But I've never seen him before, so they must be on a different floor than
Cute shoes, bow ties, all day long. Little glasses, Sean, he's fabulous. I love him.
I'll see him on Friday probably at the meeting.
I highly doubt.
That's exciting.
Yes. I'm sure he would be glad for you to say hello because it's so funny. He actually called me today because I guess they were rehearsing Vacancia, and he called me. He was like, "Listen."
Yeah.
I'm like, ah.
I mean, that part of it is like the shit to listen to.
Yes.
I mean, it's just
Sorry, I got you. Thank you for asking.
Yeah. Oh, you have the card too? I started screaming when he gave me his card.
and recently in this new job.
I love it. I'm so proud of your card.
I know, but I was freelancing and I went cards.
Well, right. I don't have cards anymore. I should, but I don't.
People, I mean, it's like, you know, you go to like traditional businesses.
Oh, I know, and they have these things. They have all these things. Give them to each other.
Well, I guess would be.
But then I lose them. That's the thing. I just lose them, and then I have to Google them.
Yeah.
And then I find it.
I feel like the contemporary business card is someone to say, well, your info.
Right.
Or bump.
Right. Or be like, what's your phone
Yeah.
number? Okay, I'm texting you right now. Okay,
Yeah.
now you have it. Great.
Right, I'm calling you. Okay, that's it.
Yeah, exactly.
It's really true.
But sometimes I think it's kind of
Cards. What are you even doing?
no, like just this conversation. You know,
As opposed to just.
things got so. I feel like in the 90s we got into political correctness. Do you remember that? Like, I'm only 30, but I feel like in the 90s things got so like, you know, you weren't so handicapped, everything was a little impaired,
Right.
visually impaired, and everything got so PC and so sterile.
Yeah.
That now there's like a little bit of like, okay, even though like our buffer is affected or electronic,
But it's still inclusive, like
Yeah.
Facebook. I mean, I can Facebook
I can Facebook you right now.
anybody.
Yeah.
I mean, that's actually what I started doing. I was Facebooking. Like, I was looking on people's pages to see what composers they had, and I was like looking them up. Because I have nobody to help me get into like the composer new works world.
You should talk to like AOP is really great. They employ Sing for Them. because they do just all kinds of stuff, and then you'll end up meeting. And even if you sing for them and nothing happens immediately, because composers are also always going to them just with ideas or asking them questions, because composers have the same problem that you're having in reverse of saying, like, well, I want to write like a song cycle, but I don't really know any singers, but I've always wanted to use for voice, and they don't, you know what I mean? It happens on both ends. So, and companies like AOT are really good sort of conduits for that, especially AOP, I think, because they kind of operate at all levels at the same time. They kind of don't allow themselves to define what it is that they do exactly. Sometimes they produce a full piece. Sometimes they do workshops. Sometimes they do. Sometimes they just support readings of something. Sometimes they have like a whole composers and voice program they do every year or every 2 years. So they kind of like
incubate a lot of things.
Yeah, and so they, if you went to them and just said, I'm a singer, really am interested in working with composers, they would have 5 different ideas of what. They wouldn't be like, well, okay, did you apply for our blah blah blah, or why didn't you? They'd be like, oh great, they'd sit down and they'd talk with you. They might even just say like, actually, like, I know this person's looking for, oh, you're a soprano, okay, actually, this person's looking for a soprano for this project, it's not us, but like, you should go talk to them. It happens all the time.
There's they just did an event.
Yeah. How was it? I wanted to go. The book one, it was all about book one writers.
There's a composer I didn't know I was playing piano. He had a piece of
Yeah.
So it's been, it's interesting. It's just surprising to me the disconnect.
Oh yeah, it's amazing.
It's really kind of impressive how that just totally got disconnected. And even in schools, I wanted to say, I really think that the work is schools, because by the time you get singers singing new works, then we learn that that's what we're supposed to do.
Right.
And then when we get out into the world, we
look for composers to keep doing it.
are looking, but we don't even get, it's like composers in one department, singers in the other department. You never collaborate.
Never shake hands.
You never, and it's just like this crazy thing.
Yeah.
And some places have addressed it. Like, I got lucky, I did my master's at USC, and they did this incredible thing where it was a team, it was a cross-disciplinary program, and they got funding. At that time, the USC was funding all of these, like, the school itself was like putting a bunch of money into doing like cross-disciplinary, it's like all hot right now to do that, right? And this was a couple years ago, and like USC was funding. So it was team taught between a poet from the creative writing faculty, the music coach who was teaching a semester of like rep in the English language, and a composer. And so what it was is they brought in like it was like 8 composers, 8 poets from the creative writing space, and like 4 singers maybe that were already doing this English song rep course. And as part of their requirement, they were required to basically be in this workshop and learn new pieces. And the poets were writing texts and setting, so it actually, like, everybody actually works together. And then for some people, like, those led into collaborations and lives, after that course was over. But it doesn't happen. I think it's starting to happen more, but it doesn't happen. It's getting better. I think USC was actually really good at that a little earlier on. They were kind of already. They also did they did a course that was on like a sort of music history course on the ballet russe. But it was team taught between one of the composition faculty, a musicologist, and someone from the theater department who was mostly a scenic and costume designer. And so, like, they could come at these projects from every angle of, like, what was innovative about their projects from a design standpoint.
I don't mean to interrupt for a second, but John, thanks so much.
No, it's my pleasure.
I enjoyed it very much.
Yeah, it's great
I
to
hope
meet
we
you.
can work together sometime.
Yeah, absolutely.
That was great. It was great to have your perspective.
It's all the money.
No. But you shouldn't feel bad about it. It is, and it's also I mean, the thing, the positive spin on that I wanted to bring at one point is I do think that sometimes that it forces your creativity to go somewhere else. And sometimes it actually results in the best decision.
Thank you. Jim, you're a composer?
No, I'm an artist.
Oh, okay, great. Oh, nice to meet you.
Well, for years I was representing
Plus, you know, yeah. Yeah, I know. Yeah. You all have your problems too, just on a different scale. Yeah. Anyway, nice to meet you. Yeah. Thank you. I'll take care. Thank you.
Is it even worth talking about, actually? But whenever you say anything a little bit about that, then everyone latches on and it becomes discussion about this is an opera.
Oh, yeah.
It can go on forever. It can go on forever. It's not actually that easy. I think it's just something you just need to get I just think it doesn't matter. No, it just doesn't matter. It's like, just don't even talk about it. Just do the pieces you want to do and do the way you want to do that. And let somebody else figure it out later.
Yeah.
But, and then that was a mistake.
I like opera and I have video, so let's
You were nervous? Couldn't tell.
No, couldn't tell.
Couldn't tell.
But, yeah, thanks for having me, Jose. I'll throw that out.
Yeah. Are you done?
Yeah. I'm on the down.
Yeah, I get
down
that.
right now. No, that was the up. This is the down. Get us back to normal. Yeah.
Exactly.
But yeah, I think there's so many composers running around the city. It's out of control. So I'm sure
I told her, I was like, a lot of composers are sort of in collectives, whatever.
There's that too.
Sometimes in cahoots with different groups or whatever.
Did you just move to the city, or?
Yeah.
Okay.
She was here for undergrad.
Okay. And then where did you do grad? Did you do grad school, or did you?
Yeah, I used to.
See, and that's the other thing. So, like, I did my undergrad at Indiana University, and then I did my master's at USC, and then I was very briefly in Chicago, and then almost in Turkey, but then not, and then ended up here. And I found it took me a year to get my sea legs in terms of like figuring out. I mean, I had friends and I had contacts that were I had musician friends and I had director friends and set design friends, and like I could put a show on if I wanted to from all these friends I had from working at Glimmerglass for 5 years. But even so, not having done grad school in the vicinity of New York, and not or in New York, that transition was it took a little while to kind of dig in. It took I really took a year. It wasn't until at the end of the first year being here, I was like, why am I actually spending the money on being here? I'm still only doing work, like I'm flying back out to like San Francisco to do something because of contacts from LA, and like why am I here? And then it was in the second year that like all of a sudden it was like, and by this I've been here for 3.5 years now, and now it's like, okay, actually like here is like there are things here, and there are like, you know, so it that like a little patience is good, you know. I mean, also be tenacious, but I don't think it's going to take you very long. If you're a singer that really wants to sing new stuff, it's going to happen.
And if you can do it.
Yeah, I have a lot of time and patience.
There you go.
I'm not the best academic singer. Like, that's not what I do.
That doesn't matter. It's just, can you learn it?
Yeah, it just takes some time for me to learn it. I'm not, I'm not the
gonna
greatest.
Sight read a 12-tone piece.
No, but I will learn it.
Right.
I will learn it. I will sit there in front of my little piano, and I will plug out my notes until I have, you know what I'm saying, that kind of thing. And but what I like is to be able to have the freedom of, you know, really interpreting the piece with this free space. Like it feels like other pieces, there's a cloud.
I agree. That was always my
the other singers over it that have. It's like the spirit is like.
Right. No, it's true. What are you going to do?
It's more about all of the creation than
they're just
I remember, like,
when
I was up at Glimmerglass this summer, like, one of whose name is escaping me, which is really sad because she made the huge impression on me this summer was she sang Medea. I can't remember what her name was. Italian woman. She was one of the most incredible singers I've seen in a long time, just like a brilliant performer, incredible voice and incredible singing, but also just incredible performance. Like, she was a great actress. She, like, just when she's on that stage, it was just out of control, and everything else about it was great. And all the reviews were like, yeah, she really just channels Callus for this. I was like, she doesn't channel Callus. She's just doing what she does. Like, Callus is not. I mean, Callus was genius, and like I love her as much as anybody else. Like, she's amazing, and I'll listen to recordings of her until the cows come home. But like, she's not the only singer who is a dramatic and interpretive artist. Like, there are others, and they don't all just like channel Callus. So I know what you're saying. It's hard.
It's just, I'm finding it refreshing. You know, you have this
It's liberating.
role,
It's so
and
liberating
like,
when you're in that
there
singer
was only
box.
like one other person who sang it,
Right.
or you know,
or when something's written for you,
or you're just doing it.
Exactly, and it's like, oh, this is radical. So
it's a different sense of responsibility.
Well, and I think it also helps with the performers I know who are dedicated and interested in doing new work and get more and more experience doing new work. I find that they end up being more interesting interpreters of even like that standard rep stuff, because they start realizing they ask different questions and they understand that those scores are actually, when those scores were being written, and in actuality they still are pretty malleable. They actually aren't. Like, I actually I just finished a song for this the Five Boroughs Music Festival. Who's someone you should Jesse Blumberg, who's a friend of mine who does a lot of. You should meet him too, or get in touch with him. He does a lot of he programs a lot of stuff, and knows, you know, he's interested in singers, because he is a singer. But they just commissioned 20 composers to each write a song about New York City, to sort of put together this songbook, and it's premiering on October 6th. I did one of them, and I very behind the deadline, just writing my piece yesterday, but whatever. And I was just having a conversation today with Jocelyn Dueck, who's the pianist and coach who's doing the piece that I did, and she's doing about half of it. Who's someone else you should meet, because she's such a lovely person, great musician, and she's. Do you know Jocelyn? Yeah, she's incredible. Yeah.
Jesse's Jesse. He's on Facebook.
Yeah, he is definitely.
Or you can look up their thing, Blumberg, BLUM.
BERG. And also, I can send you. I don't know if I could give you a comp for it, but for that, if you want to come on October 6th, I think there's like I know I have a code. They gave me a code that gets like half-price tickets, reduced tickets. I think it's $20, which is fine. But I think there's a code. I think I still have the code that would give $10 tickets, which I'd happily send to you if you want to come to that event. I don't think I can. I don't think they weren't letting me do any comps even for like my boyfriend before. They were like, we can't. But the point of all this to say, like, I was just having a conversation with Jocelyn today, because there's one part in the piano where I just wanted this like real like shimmer and the harmonies to just sort of shift, but the piano is just supposed to do this shimmering thing, and what I wrote is completely unplayable. And Jocelyn was like, yeah, you can't really do it this way. She's like, actually, this happens in Schubert all the time too, and we still aren't always clear like what to do. Like, we still don't actually know how accurate we're supposed to be with some of this stuff, because we're not really sure what Schubert actually meant. Like, you have to do exactly this and what he was just approximating from when he was playing it and so on. So it's like, Jocelyn's a great example of someone like that who does all this standard stuff too, and for her to say to me, like, I know what you're going for, and the way you're notating it, what I'm going to do is probably something really different, but actually I have this in Schubert all the time too. There are these moments in his work where you can tell the effect he wants, and what is there is actually completely unplayable. And it's sort of up for debate, and all these different pianists do different things to kind of
make it work.
Get what they think is maybe what he was after when he said that. Who knows what he did, because he's not alive. It's a very long story to get to that.
No, I loved it.
But yeah, I don't have a card, but my website is johnmakesnoise.com. It's easy to remember. I found just the John Glover is like the most common name on earth, so I was like,
seriously?
Yeah, it's pretty common. So I was like, well, I'm just gonna figure a URL that I can say and that someone won't forget.
Yep, it's a good
good one.
And my friend figured it out for me. But that has my email address on it, so if you send me an email, I'd really put you in touch with
I did. That was a funny story. I said, okay, well, whatever.
Yeah.
I know this is like filming me.
No, but I happily try to.
Being streamed live on the
Are you
Alpha
soprano
America
or
website.
mezzo?
No, I checked. I was like, this better not be streaming live.
You just